The first time I saw him, I forgot how to breathe, and I don't mean that in a poetic way. I mean my chest actually locked, like something inside me recognized him before my mind could catch up. It was raining. Of course it was. The kind of cold Manhattan rain that seeps through your coat and settles into your bones. And he was just standing there under a flickering streetlight, sneakers soaked, hair plastered to his forehead, looking small in a city that doesn't notice anything. I should have walked past him. I've walked past 1,000 people without a second glance. But something pulled me, something quiet and dangerous. Then he looked up, and everything inside me shifted. Those eyes, gray, sharp, too familiar. They hit me like a memory I never gave myself permission to keep. 5 years ago, she disappeared without a trace. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone, leaving behind silence so heavy I buried it under work, under control, under everything I could buy or command. Emily Carter was the one thing I never managed to control, and I told myself I didn't care, that whatever we had was temporary, forgettable, replaceable. I was wrong. Mom says not to talk to strangers, the boy said, his voice steady, not scared, just careful, like he'd been taught the world wasn't safe. I realized then I was staring, and I don't stare, not at anyone, but I couldn't look away. 10 feet between us felt like a line I wasn't supposed to cross, like stepping closer would confirm. Something I wasn't ready to face. Where's your mom? Wait, glanced back at me, and in that small movement, I saw it again. The way he held himself, the way his eyes narrowed just slightly, like he was assessing me. It wasn't coincidence, it couldn't be. I don't believe in coincidences. The rain got heavier, tapping against the pavement in a steady rhythm, but I barely felt it. All I could hear was the echo of a truth forming in the back of my mind, something I had no proof for, no logic to support, just instinct, raw and unrelenting. 5 years of silence suddenly felt like a lie. And standing there, 10 feet away from a child who looked at me like he was trying to understand something he couldn't name, I realized I wasn't afraid of being wrong. I was afraid of being right. I did not move when she finally looked up. And maybe that was my first mistake, because the second our eyes met, I saw it. The recognition, sharp and immediate, followed by something colder, something guarded. Emily froze for half a second, just long enough for me to know I had not imagined any of this. Then she crossed the street faster than necessary, her hand reaching for the boy before I could say a word. Liam, she said, her voice tight, controlled. I told you to stay close, and he nodded like he was used to that tone, like rules were something he understood better than most kids his age. She did not look at me again at first, not fully, just a glance, quick and measured, like I was a problem she needed to solve without letting it grow bigger. I had faced men who tried to challenge me, negotiations that could shift entire markets, but nothing had ever felt like this, standing in the rain. 5 years of silence pressing down on my chest, waiting for her to acknowledge me. You should go, she said finally, still not meeting my eyes, her hand resting lightly on Liam's shoulder, not protective, but close enough to remind me that there was distance now, a line drawn somewhere I could not see. I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding, slow, controlled, the way I had trained myself to respond to everything that mattered. That is not how this works, I said, and my voice sounded steady, but even to me, it felt different, less certain than it should have been. She laughed once, but there was no humor in it, just disbelief, maybe frustration. You do not get to decide how this works, she replied, and this time she did look at me, really look, and there it was, the history, the things we never said. The reason she left without a word. Liam shifted beside her, glancing between us, his small hand tightening around the fabric of her coat. He could feel it, whatever this was, even if he did not understand it. I looked at him again, and it hit harder this time, not just the eyes, but the way he stood, the quiet awareness, the way he listened more than he spoke. I had seen that before, in mirrors, in reflections I never trusted. How old is he? I asked. And the question came out quieter than I expected, almost careful. Emily's expression changed instantly, something closing off behind her eyes. That is not your concern, she said. And the answer was too quick, too defensive, like she had been waiting for that exact question. 5 years, I calculated automatically, 5 years since she disappeared. 5 years since I convinced myself she was just another chapter one did not need to reopen. The math did not require effort, it settled into place with a precision I could not ignore. Liam looked up at me again. Curious now, not afraid. Just trying to figure out why his mother sounded different, why the air between us felt heavier than the rain around us. I stepped closer without thinking, just one step, but it was enough to shift everything. Emily's hand tightened on his shoulder, subtle but unmistakable, and that was when I saw it clearly. Not fear of me, but fear of what I might realize. And in that moment, the truth was no longer a question. It was something solid, something undeniable, something that had been waiting 5 years to find me. I did not need confirmation, I did not need proof, because standing there, looking at the boy who carried pieces of me in ways he could not possibly understand, I knew exactly why she ran, and more importantly, I knew she had never planned for me to find out. I should have walked away right then, because knowing the truth and facing it are not the same thing, and I had just crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The rain kept falling, steady and indifferent, but everything else felt too sharp, too loud, like the world had narrowed down to just the three of us standing on that street. Emily's grip on Liam did not loosen, not even for a second, and that told me more than anything she could have said. She was not surprised I figured it out. She was prepared for it. "We are leaving," she said, her voice calm again. Controlled in that way I remembered too well. The tone she used when she had already made a decision and nothing I said would change it. Liam looked up at her, then back at me, and I could see the question forming behind his eyes, quiet but persistent. He was observant, more than most kids his age, and that only made this harder. "You are not taking him anywhere," I said, and I did not raise my voice. I did not need to, because the words landed heavy enough on their own. Emily stopped, just for a second, her shoulders tightening before she turned back to face me fully this time. "You do not get to make that call," she replied. And there it was again, not fear, not anger, but something deeper, something that came from years of carrying this alone. I stepped closer, close enough to see the faint lines at the corner of her eyes, the exhaustion she tried to hide, the strength she never had to prove to anyone but me. 5 years, I said quietly, letting the number sit between us, letting it mean everything it needed to mean. Her expression flickered, just for a moment, and that was all I needed. Liam shifted beside her, his small hand slipping into hers, grounding her in a way I had never been able to. I noticed the details without trying. The way she angled her body slightly in front of him, not blocking me, but placing herself between us, instinctively protective. It should have irritated me. That distance, that barrier, but it did not. It did something worse, something unfamiliar. It made me hesitate. "He deserves to know," I said, and this time my voice was lower, not a command, not even a demand, just a statement that carried more weight than anything I had said before. Emily shook her head immediately, too quickly, like the idea itself was something she refused to let exist. "No," she said, and the word was final, absolute. "He deserves a life that is not shaped by your world." Her words hit harder than I expected, not because they were wrong, but because part of me knew exactly why she believed that. I had built everything I had on control, on power, on decisions that did not leave room for softness, and now I was standing in front of the one thing that did. Liam looked up at me again, and this time he did not look away. "Do you know my mom?" he asked, his voice curious, cautious, trying to piece together something that did not make sense yet. Emily's hand tightened around his, and I saw it. The fear she had been holding back, not of me, but of this moment, of what came next. I met his gaze, steady, unflinching, even though something inside me shifted in a way I could not control. I could lie, walk away, let her keep the life she built without me. But the truth had already found its way here, standing in the rain between us. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of every choice I had ever made settle into this one moment. And then I answered him, not with everything, not yet, but enough to change everything that came after. "Yeah," I said quietly, my eyes never leaving his. "I know her better than anyone." I should have stopped there, kept it simple, but the moment the words left my mouth, I saw the shift in his eyes, the way curiosity sharpened into something deeper, something that asked questions neither of them were ready to answer. Emily's breath caught, barely noticeable, but I knew her well enough to see it. The tension she tried to bury under control. Liam, she said quickly, her voice softer now, almost too careful. We need to go, sweetheart. But he did not move, not yet, his gaze still fixed on me like he was trying to solve a puzzle no one had explained to him. How do you know her? He asked, and there was no fear in it, just honesty, the kind that does not hide behind anything. I felt something tighten in my chest, unfamiliar, unwelcome, but impossible to ignore. Emily stepped slightly in front of him this time, not enough to block him, just enough to remind me that she was still trying to control what happened next. That is enough, she said, her tone firmer now. The version of her that pushed back against me. The version I had not seen in 5 years. I could have pressed harder, forced the truth into the open right there on that street. But something in Liam's expression stopped me. Something that told me this was not a moment to take, but one to understand. I exhaled slowly, letting the rain fill the silence between us, steady and relentless, like time itself had been waiting for this confrontation. We used to work together, I said finally, choosing the words carefully, watching both of them as I spoke. It was not the truth, not fully, but it was not a lie either, just a piece of something bigger. Liam nodded slightly, accepting it for now, but I could tell he was not satisfied, that he would remember this, come back to it later when things made more sense. Emily did not relax, not even a little, her eyes still locked on mine like she was measuring every word, every movement, waiting for me to cross a line she had already drawn. That was a long time ago, she added, her voice quieter, but there was an edge to it, a warning wrapped in something softer. I tilted my head slightly, studying her the way I used to, noticing the details she could not hide, the way her fingers tightened around Liam's hand, the way her shoulders stayed tense even when she tried to appear calm. Not long enough, I replied, and the words came out before I could stop them, low and steady, carrying more meaning than I intended to show. Her expression faltered for just a second, and that was all it took to confirm what I already knew, that whatever she had built in these 5 years, it was not as unshakable as she wanted it to be. A car passed behind me, headlights cutting through the rain, and for a moment, everything felt suspended, like the world was waiting to see what I would do next. Liam glanced up at her again, sensing the tension even if he did not understand it, and I saw the way. She softened immediately, the way her focus shifted back to him, grounding herself in the one thing she refused to lose. We are going home, she said gently, and this time, he nodded, finally taking a step back with her. I watched them move, not stopping them, not yet, because forcing this now would only break something I did not fully understand. But as they turned away, as the distance between us grew with each step, I felt it settle into place, clear and undeniable. This was not over, not even close, because 5 years of silence had just been broken in the span of a few minutes. And no matter how far she tried to run again, I was not the man she left behind anymore. And this time, I was not going to let the truth disappear with her. I waited exactly 10 seconds after they disappeared into the crowd before I moved, not because I needed time, but because I needed control, and control meant not chasing blindly, not reacting like a man who had just had his world rearranged by a pair of gray eyes and a truth he could not ignore. The rain had soaked through my coat by then, but I barely felt it as I turned toward the car waiting at the curb, the engine still running, the driver watching me through the rearview mirror like he always did when something shifted in my expression. I opened the door, slid inside, and shut out the noise of the street in one smooth motion. Follow them, I said, my voice calm, steady, the way it always sounded when decisions had already been made. The car eased forward without hesitation, merging into traffic like we had done this 1,000 times before. But this was different, and I knew it. I leaned back slightly, eyes fixed ahead, replaying every second of that encounter, every word, every look, every detail I might have missed. 5 years, I thought again. But this time it was not just a number, it was a timeline, a sequence of choices that had led to this exact moment. Emily Carter had not disappeared. She had relocated, planned, built a life carefully enough that I had not found her until now. That alone told me how far she had been willing to go to keep this secret. Maintain distance, I added quietly. And the driver nodded once, adjusting without needing further instruction. Through the rain-streaked window, I caught glimpses of them ahead, Emily holding Liam's hand, guiding him through the sidewalk traffic with practiced ease. She knew how to move unnoticed, how to blend into the rhythm of the city, and that did not surprise me. What surprised me was how normal it all looked, how ordinary their life appeared from the outside. A mother and her son, walking home in the rain, nothing remarkable, nothing that would draw attention. But I knew better. I always knew better. The car slowed as they turned down a quieter street, lined with older buildings, the kind that had seen decades of lives pass through them without ever changing much. I watched as Emily stopped at the entrance of a modest apartment building, reaching into her bag for keys while Liam shifted beside her, shaking water from his sleeves like it was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. He laughed softly at something she said, and the sound carried faintly through the glass, light and unguarded, and it did something unexpected to me, something I was not prepared for. I looked away for a second, just a second, then back again as they disappeared inside, the door closing behind them with a quiet finality that felt heavier than it should have. Silence settled in the car, thick and deliberate, and I let it sit there, not rushing to fill it, not rushing to act, because this was not a situation that required speed. It required precision. Emily thought she had time, thought she could control how this unfolded, but she was wrong about one thing. She was not the only one who had spent the last 5 years building something. I reached into my coat, pulled out my phone, and stared at the screen for a moment before dialing a number I had not used in a while. It rang once, twice, then connected. "I need everything," I said, my voice low, measured, leaving no room for misunderstanding. Emily Carter, current address, work, routine, and anything connected to the boy. There was a brief pause on the other end. Not hesitation, just acknowledgement. "Understood," came the reply. I ended the call without another word, slipping the phone back into my pocket as I looked up at the building one more time. The lights flickered faintly behind the windows, ordinary, quiet, almost peaceful, but I knew better than to trust what something looked like on the surface, because 5 years ago, she left me with silence, and tonight, I had found the truth hiding inside it. The next morning did not feel like a new beginning. It felt like a continuation of something that had already started 5 years ago and had simply been waiting for me to catch up. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of my office. The city stretched out below in sharp lines and cold light, the kind of view people assumed gave clarity, but all it did was remind me how much could exist beneath the surface without ever being seen. My phone buzzed once against the glass table behind me, a single notification, exactly on time. I did not turn immediately. I let the moment breathe, because once I looked, there would be no going back to not knowing. When I finally picked it up, the screen lit up with everything I had asked for: organized, precise, efficient. Emily Carter, age 28, registered under a different address 3 years ago, steady employment at a small design firm 10 blocks from the apartment. No irregular activity, no obvious connections to anything that would raise concern. She had built a quiet life, deliberate and contained, the kind that did not invite attention. I scrolled further, my thumb slowing as I reached the part that mattered. Liam Carter, 5 years old, enrolled in a nearby elementary school, no listed father. The words sat there, simple, factual, and yet they carried more weight than anything else on the screen. No listed father. I read it twice, not because I needed to, but because something about seeing it written made it real in a way nothing else had. I set the phone down carefully, my reflection staring back at me through the glass, composed, controlled, exactly as it should be. But there was something different behind my eyes, something I could not categorize the way I did everything else. A knock came at the door, sharp and measured, and I allowed it before turning. "Come in," I said, my voice even, unaffected. The door opened, and Daniel stepped inside, closing it quietly behind him, his posture straight, his expression neutral, but his eyes already searching for answers I had not given yet. "You asked for a full report," he said, placing a thin folder on the table as if the digital version had not already told me everything I needed to know. I nodded once, stepping away from the window, each movement deliberate, controlled. "Anything unusual?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Daniel hesitated for half a second, just enough for me to notice. No, he replied. But then he added, she keeps a very structured routine, almost like she expects it to be disrupted. I let that settle, because it confirmed what I had already begun to understand. Emily had not just built a life, she had built a system, one designed to protect something or someone. I picked up the folder, flipping it open without urgency, scanning the printed details even though they mirrored what I had already seen. Schedules, locations, patterns, everything neat, predictable, controlled, except for one thing. Me. I closed the folder slowly, placing it back on the table with a quiet precision that made Daniel straighten slightly. Waiting. Prepare a car, I said, my tone unchanged, but final. He did not ask where. He did not need to. Now, he asked anyway, just to confirm timing, not intent. I looked past him, toward the window again, toward a city that suddenly felt smaller than it had the day before. Now, I repeated, because 5 years ago, she made a decision for both of us. And this time, I was not going to let her decide how the story ended. I do not usually show up unannounced, but that morning I stood across the street from Liam's school 10 minutes before the first bell, hands still, mind already 3 steps ahead of every possible outcome. The building was smaller than I expected, brick walls, faded blue doors, a playground that had seen better days, the kind of place people trusted because it felt ordinary. Parents moved in and out, coffee cups in hand, conversations light, unaware of how quickly something simple could become complicated. I watched the entrance, not the crowd, because patterns reveal themselves when you stop looking at everything and focus on what matters. And right on time, she appeared. Emily walked beside him, her pace steady, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder like she had done 1,000 times before. Liam was talking about something. I could tell by the way his hands moved, animated, open, the way children speak when they feel safe. She smiled at him, small but real, and for a second, I saw something I had never been part of, a version of her that existed without me. It should have made this easier, seeing that she had built something stable, something untouched by my world, but it did not. It made it harder, because now I understood what she had been protecting. They stopped near the entrance, and she knelt slightly to adjust his jacket, brushing rain from his shoulders with careful movements. Stay close to your teacher, she said, her voice soft but firm, the kind of instruction that comes from habit, from care. He nodded, then hesitated, glancing back toward the street, toward me. Even though I had not moved, had not made a sound, I felt it again, that pull, that recognition that did not belong to logic. Emily followed his gaze, and this time, there was no delay, no hesitation. She saw me immediately. Her expression did not break, but I saw the shift, subtle, controlled, the way she straightened just slightly, placing herself between me and him without making it obvious. She walked him inside, not rushing, not drawing attention, but not looking back either. And that told me everything. She knew this was not over. I waited until the doors closed behind them before I moved, crossing the street with the same measured pace I used in every situation that required control. The security guard by the entrance barely glanced at me, just another man in a city full of them, and I stepped inside without breaking stride. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning solution and something warmer, something familiar, like routine. Children's voices echoed from classrooms, light and unburdened, and for a moment, it felt like I had stepped into a world that had no place for someone like me. But I kept walking, because this was not about where I belonged. It was about where he did. I reached the office, knocked once, and waited. A woman behind the desk looked up, polite, professional, unaware. "Can I help you?" she asked. I gave a small nod. Calm, composed, the version of myself that always got what it needed without raising questions. "I am here for Liam Carter," I said, and the name settled into the room like it had always been mine to say. She smiled faintly, checking something on her screen, then paused, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "And you are?" she asked. There it was, the question that defined everything. I held her gaze, steady, unshaken, because this was the moment where hesitation would cost more than truth. "Family," I replied, my voice low but certain, and for the first time since I walked into that building, I felt it settle completely. Not doubt, not uncertainty, but something solid, something undeniable, because no matter what she had planned, no matter how far she had gone to keep this from me, I was here now, and I was not leaving without him knowing exactly who I was. The woman behind the desk did not answer immediately, and I could see the moment her training caught up with my presence, the way her polite smile tightened just enough to signal hesitation. Family, she repeated, slower this time, like she was testing the word against something she could not quite verify. I held her gaze without blinking, not pushing, not explaining, because the truth did not need decoration. It just needed time to settle. She glanced at her screen again, then back at me, and I could almost see the decision forming behind her eyes, the quiet calculation of whether I belonged here or not. I will need to call his guardian, she said finally, her voice still calm but more careful now. I gave a small nod, expected, reasonable, exactly how this should go. You can do that, I replied, and there was something in my tone that made her pause again, not fear, not discomfort, just awareness. She picked up the phone, dialing a number I already knew, her fingers moving with routine precision. It rang once, twice, and I felt the seconds stretch in a way they never did in any other situation. Then she spoke, her voice softening slightly, professional but respectful. Hello, Miss Carter. This is the front office. There is someone here asking for Liam. He says he is family. There was a pause, longer this time, and I did not need to hear Emily's voice to know exactly how that word landed on the other end. The woman's expression shifted, subtle but clear, as she listened, her eyes flicking toward me once, then back to the desk. Yes, he is here now, she added, and that was all she needed to say before the call ended. She placed the receiver down carefully, her posture straightening as she looked at me again, this time with something closer to understanding. She is on her way, she said. I nodded once. Nothing more, because there was nothing else to add. The room fell into a quiet that felt heavier than it should have, filled only by the distant sound of children's voices echoing through the hallway. Light and unaware, I stepped aside, slightly, giving space, not because I needed to, but because this was not a moment to dominate. It was a moment to wait. Minutes passed slowly, measured not by time but by anticipation, by the weight of everything that was about to collide. Then the front door opened again, and I felt it before I saw her, that shift in the air, that presence I had not been able to forget even after 5 years. Emily walked in quickly, her steps controlled but urgent, her eyes finding me instantly like she had known exactly where I would be standing. She did not greet me, did not acknowledge anything except the fact that I was here, that I had crossed into the one place she had tried to keep separate. You should not be here, she said, her voice low, steady, but there was no softness left in it. I studied her for a moment, taking in the way her expression held firm, the way she kept her shoulders squared, like she was bracing for something she could not stop. And yet I am, I replied, calm, unchanged, because this was not about where I should be, it was about what was already true. Her jaw tightened slightly, and I saw it, the frustration, the fear she refused to show fully, the realization that this was no longer something she could manage on her own. You cannot just walk into his life like this, she said. And this time there was more behind the words, something closer to emotion than control. I took a step closer, not aggressive, not forceful, just enough to close the distance she had been trying to maintain since yesterday. I did not walk into his life, I said quietly, my voice steady but carrying something deeper now, something that did not need to be raised to be heard. I was always part of it. The words settled between us, heavier than anything else in that room. And for the first time, she did not have an immediate response, because no matter how carefully she had planned, no matter how far she had gone to keep this hidden, we had reached the point where silence was no longer enough to hold it together. She looked at me like she wanted to say something sharper, something that would push me back out of that building and out of their lives again. But nothing came, not right away, and that silence told me more than any argument could, because Emily Carter had always been good with words, always knew exactly what to say when things got complicated, and right now, she had none. You do not get to decide that, she said finally, her voice lower now, less controlled, like the weight of the situation was starting to break through the edges she had been holding so tightly. I did not respond immediately, Because this was not about winning a conversation, it was about shifting something that had been locked in place for 5 years. The office door behind her opened slightly, and a teacher stepped out, guiding a small group of children down the hallway, their voices filling the space with a kind of lightness that did not belong to this moment. Liam was among them. I saw him before he saw us. His backpack slightly too big for his frame, his attention focused on something his friend was saying. Then his eyes lifted, and everything changed. He stopped mid-step, his gaze moving from his teacher to Emily, then to me, and I saw it again, that quiet recognition, that instinct that did not have a name yet. "Mom?" he asked, his voice soft, uncertain, and she turned. Immediately, her entire posture shifting as she stepped toward him, instinctively placing herself closer, grounding him. "It is okay," she said gently, her hand resting on his shoulder, but her eyes flicked back to me for just a second, enough to show that it was not okay, not for her. Liam looked between us, confusion settling in slowly, not overwhelming, just enough to make him ask the question he had been holding since yesterday. "Is he the man from the rain?" he asked, and the simplicity of it hit harder than anything else. Emily's breath caught again, quieter this time, but I saw it. She had hoped this moment would not come so soon. I stepped forward slightly, not enough to close the distance completely, just enough to make it clear I was not leaving. "Yeah," I said, my voice calm, steady, the same tone I had used before, but this time it carried more weight. Liam studied me for a second, then nodded slowly, like he was placing me into a category he did not fully understand yet. "Why are you here?" he asked next, and there was no fear in it, just curiosity, the kind that children carry before the world teaches them to question it. Emily opened her mouth, ready to answer for him, to control the narrative the way she had been doing for 5 years, but I spoke first, not over her, not to interrupt, but because this was the moment that mattered. "I came to see you," I said, and the truth of it settled into the space between us. Liam blinked, processing, his small hand tightening slightly on the strap of his backpack. "Why?" he asked again, and this time, there was something else behind it, something deeper, something that made Emily's shoulders tense beside him. I held his gaze, steady, unflinching, because this was not a question I could avoid, not anymore. I could feel Emily watching me, waiting, hoping I would step back, that I would choose silence again, but that was not an option anymore. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of every decision that had led here, and then I answered him, not with everything, not yet, but enough to change the direction of everything that came after. "Because," I said quietly, my voice lower now, more certain than it had been before, "there are things you deserve to know, and I should have been here a long time ago." Liam did not answer right away, and that pause felt longer than anything that had come before, longer than 5 years of silence. Because this time, the truth was not hidden, it was standing right in front of him, waiting to be understood. He looked at me, then at Emily, then back at me again, his small mind trying to connect pieces that had never been presented together before. "What things?" he asked quietly, and the question was simple, but it carried weight that belonged to something much bigger than him. Emily stepped closer immediately, her hand tightening on his shoulder, grounding him, protecting him, controlling the moment the way she always had. "Liam," she said softly, but there was an edge to it now, something urgent beneath the calm. "You do not need to worry about that right now." He frowned slightly, not upset, just confused, because children understand more than they are given credit for, and he could feel that this was not just a normal conversation. I watched her, the way she moved, the way she tried to redirect, and for the first time, I saw it clearly, not just fear of me, but fear of losing control over something she had held together alone for too long. "He deserves the truth," I said, my voice steady, not raised, but firm enough to hold its place. Her eyes snapped back to mine instantly, sharper now, more defensive. "He deserves stability," she replied, and there it was, the line she had drawn, the one she believed justified everything she had done. I stepped closer, just enough to close the space between us, not threatening, not forcing, but present in a way she could not ignore. "Those are not opposites," I said quietly, and I meant it, because for the first time, I understood what was at stake, not in theory, but in reality. Liam shifted beside her, his hand slipping from her coat to his backpack strap again, like he needed something to hold on to while the world around him changed shape. "Are you going to tell me?" he asked, and this time, he was looking at me, not her, and that choice alone said more than anything else. Emily inhaled sharply, like she was about to step in again, to stop this before it went too far, but she hesitated, just for a second, and that hesitation was all it took. I knelt slightly, lowering myself to his level, not as a strategy, not as a move, but because it felt like the only way this moment made sense. His eyes did not leave mine, steady, searching, waiting. I said, my voice quieter now, not because I needed to be, but because this was not something that should be rushed. I could feel Emily, watching, every part of her tense, ready to pull him away if I crossed a line she could not accept. I did not look at her, not yet, because this was not about her anymore, not in this moment. Sometimes, I continued slowly, choosing each word carefully. People make choices because they think it is the only way to protect someone they care about. Liam listened, his expression serious now, absorbing every word in a way that felt too mature for his age. "Your mom did that," I added, and I meant it without judgment, without accusation. Emily's breath caught again, softer this time, like the truth was no longer something she could hold back completely. Liam glanced at her briefly, then back at me, and I saw it. The shift, the understanding starting to form even if it was incomplete. "From what?" he asked, and that question changed everything. Because that was the part she had not told him, the part she had built her entire life around hiding. I straightened slowly, my gaze finally lifting to meet hers again, and in that moment, there was no more space for silence, no more room for half-truths, because the next answer was not just about the past. It was about the future she had been trying to protect him from, and the one I was no longer willing to stay out of. Emily did not answer immediately, and that silence felt heavier than anything she could have said, because for the first time, it was not just me standing in front of her asking questions. It was him. Liam's eyes stayed on her, patient but searching, waiting for something real, something that made sense in a world that had suddenly become more complicated than it was 5 minutes ago. "Mom," he said softly, and there was something in his voice that shifted the entire moment, something that pulled her out of the control she had been holding on to. She closed her eyes briefly, just a second, like she was collecting herself, like she was deciding whether to keep protecting him the way she always had, or to let the truth finally exist between all three of us. When she opened them again, she looked at me first, not him, and that told me everything. This was not just about what to say, it was about what it would change. "From a life he was never meant to be part of," she said quietly, her voice steady but softer than before, and I felt it land, not as an accusation, not even as a defense, but as something honest. Liam frowned slightly, trying to understand, his small mind working through words that carried more weight than he had ever been asked to carry. "What does that mean?" he asked, and this time, he was not looking at me. He was looking at her, because she was the one who had always had the answers. Emily hesitated again, and I saw it. The crack in the control she had built so carefully over the years. She knelt down in front of him, bringing herself to his level, her hands resting gently on his arms, grounding both of them in the moment. "It means," she said slowly, choosing each word with care, "that I wanted you to grow up safe, without things that could make your life harder." Liam listened, his expression serious now, absorbing every piece of it. But there was still something missing, something he had not asked yet. I could feel it, the question forming before he said it. "And him?" he asked finally, his voice quieter, uncertain now in a way it had not been before. Emily's hands tightened slightly on his arms, and for the first time, I saw it clearly, not just fear of losing control, but fear of losing him. I stepped forward, not enough to interrupt, just enough to be part of the space she could no longer keep separate. "He is not something to be afraid of," I said, my voice calm, steady, but carrying something deeper now, something that was no longer just about control or certainty. Emily looked up at me instantly, her eyes sharper, questioning, like she did not know if she could believe that anymore, and maybe she had a reason not to. Liam shifted again, his gaze moving between us, and I saw it. The moment where he stopped seeing this as two separate people and started seeing it as something connected. "Then why did you leave?" he asked, and the question was not directed at me or her. It was directed at both of us. It hung there, unanswered, because this was not just about her choices anymore. It was about mine too. Emily's breath caught again, quieter this time, and she looked down for a second, like she was searching for the right way to say something that had never been spoken out loud. I did not look away from him, because this was the moment that mattered, the one where truth either held or broke. Because I did not know how to stay, she said finally, her voice almost a whisper, and there was no control left in it now, just honesty. Liam absorbed that, slowly, his small shoulders lifting slightly with a breath he had been holding. I felt something shift inside me then, something I had not expected, not anger, not frustration, but something closer to understanding. Because for the first time, I was not looking at her as someone who left. I was looking at her as someone who made a choice she thought was the only one she had. And standing there, in a school hallway that had nothing to do with the world I came from, I realized something else too. This was not just about proving what was true. It was about deciding what happened next, and whether any of us were ready for that. The hallway felt quieter after that, not because the noise had disappeared, but because something between us had shifted into a space where everything else faded into the background. Liam stood there, still processing, his small frame caught between two versions of truth that had never existed together before this moment. Emily remained kneeling in front of him, her hands still on his arms, but her grip had softened, like she understood she could not hold everything in place anymore. I watched them, not as an outsider this time, but as someone who had a place here whether she wanted to admit it or not. So, you know each other from before? Liam asked slowly, trying to rebuild the story in a way that made sense to him. Emily hesitated, her eyes flicking to me again, searching, maybe even asking without words what I would say next. I did not answer immediately, because this was not about correcting her version or replacing it with mine. It was about giving him something real to stand on. Yes, I said finally, my voice steady, simple, without layers or deflection. We knew each other before you were born. The words landed differently this time. Not heavy, not sharp, just clear. Liam nodded slowly, absorbing that, his gaze dropping for a second as he processed the timeline in his own way. Does that mean? He started, then stopped, like he was not sure how to finish the question. Emily's breath caught again, and I felt it, the tension rising, the moment stretching towards something neither of us could avoid anymore. I stepped forward just slightly, enough to be part of the space, but not enough to take it over. Means, I said quietly, choosing each word with intention, that I should have been there for you from the beginning. Emily closed her eyes briefly, and this time, she did not interrupt, did not try to stop it. Liam looked up at me again, and this time, there was something new in his expression, not just curiosity, not just confusion, but something closer to recognition. Are you my dad? He asked, and the question was softer than anything that had come before, but it carried everything. The world did not stop, the hallway did not go silent. But for me, it felt like everything narrowed down to that single moment. I did not look away, did not hesitate, because this was the truth I had already accepted the second I saw him in the rain. Yes, I said, my voice low, steady, leaving no room for doubt. Emily inhaled sharply, her hands tightening again for just a second before she let them relax, like she was finally letting go of something she had been holding onto for too long. Liam did not react the way I expected. There was no sudden shift, no dramatic change, just a quiet stillness as he absorbed it, piece by piece. Oh, he said softly, and that single word carried more weight than anything else. He looked down at his shoes for a moment, then back up at me, his expression thoughtful, careful, like he was trying to understand what this meant for him, not just now, but moving forward. Emily stood slowly beside him, her posture different now, not defensive, not closed off, just uncertain in a way I had never seen before. I met her eyes again, and for the first time, there was no argument there, no immediate resistance, just the realization that everything had changed. Liam shifted slightly closer to her, but his gaze stayed on me, steady, unafraid, open in a way that made something inside me settle into place. So, what happens now? He asked, and that question was not about the past, not about what had already been done. It was about what came next. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of it, the responsibility, the reality of something I could not control the way I controlled everything else. And for the first time, I did not have a plan ready. Did not have an answer shaped by certainty. Because this was not something that could be decided in a moment. It was something that had to be built, step by step, from something we had never had before. I did not answer him right away, and for the first time in a long time. It was not because I was calculating outcomes or choosing the best path forward. It was because this was not something that could be solved like everything else in my life. Liam's question stayed in the air between us, simple and honest, and I realized that whatever came next would not be about control. It would be about presence. I looked at him, really looked this time, not just at the details that made him familiar, but at who he was standing there in front of me, steady, curious, unafraid in a way that had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with trust he had not yet decided to give or take away. Now, I said slowly, my voice quieter than it had been before, not because I was unsure, but because this moment deserved something different. Now we take it one step at a time. He nodded slightly, like that made sense to him. Like he understood that some answers did not come all at once. Emily watched us both, her expression no longer guarded in the same way, but not fully open either, like she was standing in between two versions of a future she had never planned for. I met her eyes, and there was no argument left there, no immediate resistance, just something heavier, something closer to acceptance mixed with uncertainty. I am not here to take him away from you, I said quietly, and I meant every word of it, not as a strategy, not as reassurance, but as something real. Her shoulders lowered just slightly, the tension easing in a way that was almost invisible, but I saw it. She needed to hear that, even if she was not ready to trust it completely. Liam shifted his weight again, looking between us like he was trying to understand how two people who clearly had a history could also be standing here like strangers learning each other for the first time. "Does this mean you are staying?" he asked, and the question was softer now, but it carried something deeper. Then curiosity, something closer to hope. I felt it settle into place, the responsibility of that single word, staying. It was not something I had ever struggled with before. I either stayed in control or I walked away from anything that did not serve a purpose. But this was different. This was not about power or position. This was about showing up in ways I had never been required to before. "Yes," I said, my voice steady, leaving no space for doubt. "It means I am not going anywhere." Emily inhaled slowly, her gaze dropping for just a second before returning to mine, and I could see it. The shift, not full trust, not yet, but the beginning of something that could become it. Liam nodded again, more certain this time, like he was accepting that answer for now, storing it away to test later the way children do when they are learning what promises mean. The hallway noise started to return around us, teachers calling students, doors opening and closing, life continuing like this moment was not as significant as it felt, but for us, everything had changed. I stepped back slightly, giving them space, not leaving, just allowing the moment to settle into something that could actually exist. Beyond this conversation, Emily reached for Liam's hand again, and this time, it did not feel like she was pulling him away from me. It felt like she was holding on to something we were both now part of. I watched them for a second longer, then turned toward the exit, not because I was walking away, but because this was not something that needed to be forced further right now. As I reached the door, I paused, just for a moment, and glanced back. Liam was still watching me, his expression thoughtful, like he was already trying to understand what it meant to have someone new in his life. Emily stood beside him, her posture steadier than before, but her eyes still searching. I gave a small nod, not a promise spoken out loud, but one that did not need words, because for the first time, this was not about what I could control or change in a single move. It was about what I was willing to build, step by step, without knowing exactly where it would lead. And as I stepped out into the city again, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets quiet and clear, like something had been washed away, making room for something new. I had spent years ruling everything around me, but this was different. This was not something to rule. This was something to earn. And for the first time, I was ready to try.